Web of Conspiracy. Here is your host, Adam Webb.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It's great to be back with you this week. Apologize for no show last week. As I've made very clear, I've certainly had a lot on my plate lately, so doing my best to make sure that I try to get a show out and try not to go any longer than a week in between. Nevertheless, I do apologize. I had every intention of releasing a new show last week. Just wasn't able to find the time for it. That being said, thank you once again to everybody who continues to support the show. Means a lot. I mean, that's the reason I keep doing this, in part, is because people are listening. So I've had times, certainly over the last year or so, where I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't do the show anymore. But people keep listening, and I keep getting a lot of feedback, and most of it's really great. So once again, thank you to all those who have continued to support the show over the last year, as well as to, thank you to also the new listeners, because I know we still continue to get some new listeners in as well. So it's really exciting. Once again, thank you for your support. I do appreciate it. That being said, a few announcements. One other announcement I wanted to make is that I don't know that I had released in the last few podcasts. However, for those of you who listen to other podcasts via Blueberry, you'll now be happy to know that the Web of Conspiracy is on there, in case you hadn't already known. Some of you may have actually found the show that way, but the show is also on Blueberry now as well, so you can check it out there. And of course, as always, broadcast on Spreaker, and the show is also available via Stitcher through download. I have a dedicated YouTube channel, and of course, you can always download it via iTunes, which I still believe is the most commonly used method for listening to the show. But nevertheless, there are a number of other options, and certainly looking to continue to expand that as well. For those of you who are new to the show, I'd like to put this out there. If you haven't found us yet, I have a few social media pages. I've got a Facebook page, a Twitter, and a Google+. I haven't been as active as I liked, and I feel like I say that all the time, right? I do say that all the time. I certainly hope to be able to engage more. I have from time to time been able to post some links up, certainly for things that are applicable. So by all means, check it out. And like I said, I'm not as active as I would like to be, but certainly I'm making an effort. And by all means, that's one great way to be able to reach out to me, because I do see the messages, and I do try to get back as quickly as I can on that. So you can always message me if you have comments, questions about the show, or if you have topic ideas. I love getting some feedback, because I often will come across things that I hadn't heard of. So it really kind of opens up in terms of all the show planning that I do when I get, hey, I heard about this. This is a really cool story. Check into this. And a lot of times I've found a couple really good show ideas, including one next week. So, or hopefully next week. I'm hesitant to guarantee a show every week now, but that being said, definitely the next show is suggested by a user, a listener of the show. So, really excited about that. And as always, you can also email me at webofconspiracy@gmail.com. Web, of course, being two B's, like my last name. So, yeah, I love the feedback. And also, if you do listen to one of the shows that has rating systems, please feel free to drop comments as well as rate the show there. The more ratings I get, the higher profile it gets on the site. So it really benefits me, and if anything, it feeds my ego. So that being said, once again, just thank you to everybody who listens, and for all those who haven't connected yet, please do so. I love getting the feedback. I do. I know some people are a little hesitant about it. They're fearful of what's going to be said, and I don't expect everybody to agree with everything that I say. I certainly don't expect everybody to love everything that I do. I just want you to listen. So that being said, I really do enjoy the feedback. So now, a little bit of a different show in terms of how I normally, I like to kind of go over some different news items, and that really kind of caught my attention. And that's not really what I want to do. I have been promising moving into the conspiracy realm now for the last few weeks. Now, those of you who've listened to the show know that I touch on conspiracy certainly with UFOs and extraterrestrials and alien abduction, that kind of thing. But in terms of the real hardcore conspiracy theories, I dedicated, I think, the entire month of May of shows to that. And I wanted to kind of circle back around to it because I doing a show like this where I encompass so much, I often find myself feeling at times overwhelmed with, well, what direction do I go this week? What do the people want to hear? And I try to look at the listener stats and see, okay, which shows are the most popular, which shows, should I try to go with? But in the same respect, I really want to try to also introduce some new topics. That being said, this is not necessarily a new topic to the conspiracy realm that I'm going to get into today, but it's one that I haven't touched on ever, but it does relate to some other topics, so I'll move into that. But before I get into the main meat, I do want to talk about another little conspiracy, I guess, so to speak. And I don't know that I would call this little, but I do feel like it needs touched upon. About 2 weeks ago, I had made some statements about the situation in Ferguson, Missouri, and I know they weren't entirely popular by everybody's standards, but I really touched on something that I really wanted to kind of bring on again. I had suggested that I believe that this really is an issue of class more than anything else, and I believe that race is something that continues to be used to divide us, and I stand by that. I really do. When I look at this country today, we are a divided nation, and we are divided in so many ways. It's amazing. And every week, it seems, we get more news about things that are very divisive. Okay? We have the newly released torture report, which some people will see as justified, others will not. Our Congress right now is an absolute wreck. It's divided as possible, and gridlock is going to ensue. Of course, as I mentioned, the situation in Ferguson. And now that we are in early December, of course, we have the 2-year anniversary of what had happened in Newtown. And I think it's important to bring up the division that occurred there. Now, where we're talking about gun control or mental health. And as you see, there was certainly a clamoring for guns, but no real changes have been made to improve the mental health system, that's for certain. Not really. Nothing substantial. So we see all these things that continue to be put out by the mass media. And once again, I am not a fan of the mass media. I've made that very clear. I do not trust it. I watch it and engage in it only as to be able to ascertain what I should be concerned about in terms of what they're trying to tell me is going on. I feel we have to question everything. And I realize that creates a sense of distrust and creates a lot of anxiety for individuals who choose to do that. However, I have no reason to believe that what we're being told as the truth is ever 100% truth. We are a nation divided in the United States. We are a world divided, right? And in some respects, that division is a good thing. It can be a strength. However, when you're talking about what I believe is a larger scale issue, an issue where I believe that we as people are being separated by our economic status, our socioeconomic status, I guess you would say, more than anything. We are being controlled, I believe, by greater forces. And in terms of people who have a certain degree of power and authority. And that's funny that I say that out loud, because there would have been a time when I never would have given that much credence. And that's the truth. I have been, as I have stated on the show many times, I have been very critical of conspiracy theories. For a show with the name of The Web of Conspiracy, I have always been more so critical of conspiracy theories than anything else. I will believe I'll believe a chupacabra story before I believe a conspiracy story, right? And I've always been a little questionable of the chupacabra. That being said, I've always been a little cautious with conspiracy theories. And I cannot help but believe at this point now, after everything that I've seen over the last several years, we are being kept separate because it makes us weaker. We cannot, the people who have the wealth and the power cannot afford to let the masses take real, true control over their lives and the direction of our governments. It would be the worst thing that could happen for them. So what do? Well, you have to separate us. You can't let us organize. And I realize some people are going to, oh, you sound like a Marxist. You sound like a communist. I'm not. I consider myself pretty far from that. Nevertheless, much of Marx's theory, in terms of his philosophy, I do believe was fairly true. We are being kept where the powers that be, the people who have come into the wealth, who have inherited the wealth, or those who were allowed to join the wealthy, are keeping lower classes separate, and they're doing so in a number of ways. Race being one of the biggest. And they will continue to perpetuate race as being a divider, even though it's about wealth. And you can look at the stats and tell wealth and our lack of wealth in the lower and middle classes. It's tremendous. How do you keep all those millions of people separate? Well, you create artificial separations. You continue to, well, first off, of course, race was constructed to keep people separate, to keep things separate, right? And of course, race was a construct to certainly hold on to and secure wealth. Has always been that case. And it's no different now. But now it's continued to perpetuate to keep the lower and the middle classes separate as much as possible. And not only that, but we've also created mechanisms in which we can keep people from uniting, but keep people from going too overboard, okay? Losing too much control. And let me point this out. In the United States, we have seen a significant drop and a significant reduction in fuel prices. And that has trickled down into lower heating costs now that we're in winter months in the United States. It has trickled down to lower food costs, lower consumer costs. It's been a huge benefit, and the economy's already reaping it, and this has just been a matter of a month and a half. Interesting timing. Well, there's a number of reasons for that. Certainly there's global issues, and certainly in a global supply. But in the United States, we are now the world's leading producer in oil. We are. We produce more oil, more barrels per day, than any other nation in the world. Now, there's been a drive to do this for some time. This is true. But I find that the timing of this all being very coincidental. And everyone knows, I've said this, who's been listening, I don't like coincidence. I don't like that word because it implies that things just happen by chance. And while from time to time that may be true, I do not believe when we're talking about things on this big a scale that is the case. We are saving, we have more money in our pockets now this time of year, right before Christmas, right when it's important that we give a boost to consumer spending. People have more money. That's what do you know? And right at the end of the year, yeah, I mean, it's huge for the nation's economy if we can find a way to boost it. How do we boost it? Well, we give people more money in their pockets. And not only does that help us spend money, but it also helps us not get too worked up. Well, let's not see the real issues. Let's just leave it at race, and people will be uncomfortable, and we'll move on. We'll move on. We'll just move on. We'll just move on. Move on to the next headline. You know, the news. The media will give us the next headline, and we'll move on. Well, and then of course the Eric Garner decision, which I know many people were upset about. There we go again. Wait till there'll be another one. Now, the next one will probably put us off race. It'll be something different. It'll be another way of keeping us separate. But in the same token, we'll find ways to keep people from being too excited, too worked up. We have to control the level of violence. We have to make sure things are a little unstable, but not so unstable that we lose control. The we being, of course, the wealthy, the elites, the individuals who have the true power. That's the last thing they can afford to have, right? Yes, I do believe that there is something greater at work here. And there was a time I never would have believed that. Maybe I have fallen down the rabbit hole a bit in doing this show. It's entirely possible. But I look at this as a whole, and I see that all these issues that come up, but there's never any real change. Well, why is that? Why is there never any real change? Why is it just more of the same? Well, it's because we're not united. We're divided. Which is how the elites, the wealthy, and the powerful want us to be. We're divided. You want real change? You want real change, regardless of wherever you're at, wherever you're listening to this show from now. If you want real change, you have to unite with your brothers and sisters, regardless of what they look like, where they came from, what they do. If you want real, honest change, then you have to unite. You cannot continue to be divided. So if you want to make a difference in your community, if you want to make a difference in your neighborhood, whatever the case may be, your state, your nation, you have to unite. You can no longer be divided by this idea of race or any other type of standards in which you're supposed to be somehow different than everybody else. The only standard that we're ever truly measured by in this country anymore is wealth. And that is it. That is it. Can we produce? Is that all that we're good for? Or are we just consumers? The consumer-producer ratio is what this nation's concerned about now. And I would imagine many others as well. So, building upon this, which has been nagging at me now for a couple weeks. I certainly would have had this rant probably last week had I done a show. But that being said, I decided to move into a conspiracy in which I've heard much about, but I am going to admit I'm very skeptical of, and that's chemtrails. Now, I have a number of frustrations with the chemtrail conspiracy. However, I'll get to those frustrations near the end of the show. So, what exactly are chemtrails? Well, basically, what chemtrails are, it's believed that there are these, of course, we see these jet contrails in the sky. Well, many believe that these contrails are different than what they were 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. They don't look the same. There seems to be more of them, and they hang around and they're all over the place, and they don't dissipate the way that traditional contrails do. Well, why is that? Well, people who believe that in this chemtrail conspiracy argue that these jets are releasing certain chemicals and substances into the skies above in an effort to do a number of things. There are some who believe that it's used to sicken us, that there are chemicals and other things in these chemtrails that will actually make us sick, damage the environment, do a number of different things to thin out the population, so to speak. All right? There are a number of different stories as to what could actually be going on in the chemtrail conspiracy. There are others who believe that it is just a matter of that they're controlling the weather manipulation. Certainly for those of you who listen to my show on HARP, believe that it is in connection and works in concert with the HARP stations, and that these chemicals that are in there are helping to not only control and manipulate weather, but are also being used to control and manipulate a number of other things, such as what we think, how we feel. In a sense, a sort of mind control by using the substances in these chemtrails. Now, as I said, the chemtrail conspiracy, it's been around for a little while now. I think I had first started hearing about it in the 90s, and there are a number of people who, some of which are very credible people, who truly believe that there is something going on, that these are not the same contrails, that contrails dissipate much more rapidly when it's just water vapor in the sky, and that these are holding on much longer than they used to, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now, I have to admit that the idea of chemtrails I find a little suspicious, only because, at least initially, that, well, it looks like contrails to me. Well, perhaps jet fuels have changed. Perhaps there's a number of atmospheric conditions that could cause these contrails to not dissipate rapidly. Certainly, higher humidity levels, colder temperatures in the higher levels of the atmosphere. There's things that can go on that can certainly maintain the length and the strength of contrails, and that perhaps these things are what is leading people to believe that, well, these aren't contrails anymore, these are chemtrails. As I said, I've always been skeptical of the chemtrail story. However, that being said, I do think there could be an element of truth in this. And I'm not jumping all the way down the rabbit hole in this, but bear with me. I don't know how many of my listeners are familiar with geoengineering, the idea of geoengineering. But it is a legitimate science. As a matter of fact, for those of you who are really interested, you can learn a little bit more about it through the University of Oxford in England, who have their own geoengineering program, a website dedicated to it. You can read all about what they're working on and what they're doing in their geoengineering programs. In this program, they are working to actually manipulate solar radiation, to, as they claim, to reflect some of the solar radiation back out into the atmosphere as to lower global temperatures, to not let them get too high out of concern over global warming, which I know a number of people are skeptical of, but nevertheless, that's what this program's stated objective is. It looks to use as well, interestingly enough, stratospheric aerosols, introducing small reflective particles into the upper atmosphere to reflect some sunlight before it reaches the surface of the Earth. And yes, I am reading that verbatim from their website. They also have a program known as carbon dioxide removal, and they do this in a number of ways, certainly global tree planting, but they're also working on some ambient air capture techniques, enhance weathering, exposing large quantities of minerals that will react with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and storing the resulting compound in the ocean of the soil. Yes, it would appear that when we're looking at geoengineering as a whole, does it sound that far off from the chemtrail conspiracy? Not really. Not at all. As a matter of fact, I would have to wonder if perhaps all along there has been something to this. It would appear that geoengineering has been going on for some time. Now, the goals that have been stated in these geoengineering programs have consistently been, well, these are to improve our planet. These are to prevent global warming. A number of different stated objectives that are all good, air quotes, right? That are all good things for us. Yet, now you have to ask the questions. If they have the capability of doing this, if scientists are working on this, then how far off are we talking about the idea of chemtrails releasing things in the atmosphere. Certainly when we're talking about weather modification, cloud seeding has been going on for decades. How far off is this? Well, cloud seeding is just another form of geoengineering. So, is the chemtrail conspiracy a legitimate geoengineering concept? Well, perhaps it is. It certainly seems like it could be. The question that remains then is these chemtrails that people are witnessing. Now, certainly some have been explained through atmospheric conditions, mind you, but these other ones, what are they releasing? Are they releasing things that are good for us, or are they releasing things that are bad for us? Well, therein lies the question, okay? And there are a number of individuals that argue that have claims that, well, shortly after an area that has been heavily chemtrailed, you have people coming sick with flu epidemics. You start seeing other weather changes. Interestingly enough, some of these weather changes you see are droughts in some areas, flooding. However, another commonly asserted issue that you see is that people have tested rain in areas that have been heavily chemtrailed, so to speak, and they're finding some very toxic amounts of certain metals in rain and snow that have never before existed. Aluminum, barium have been two of those. And aluminum is incredibly toxic to humans. Okay, it's certainly if it's at high enough levels, it can be extremely toxic and can kill humans. And it is believed that aluminum is one of these primary agents that are being released in some of these geoengineering experiments in an effort to block solar radiation as well as other effects in the atmosphere. So, is this aluminum that's being dispersed into the atmosphere? Is this a good thing for us? Well, it certainly doesn't seem like it is. Despite the fact that perhaps it is blocking maybe a certain degree of the solar radiation, it doesn't seem like it's all that good after all. As a matter of fact, you begin to wonder, well, if they're willing to sacrifice the aluminum toxicity, what else are they willing to sacrifice? Scientists, whatever, the powers that be, everyone hates that they. At least I certainly hate saying they, but I don't have names necessarily. I mean, I have ideas as to who they would be. I don't want to throw the names out there for obvious reasons. I certainly don't want to have any issues other than I got enough problems on my own. I don't need to create more. But that being said, perhaps the ozone layer damage that we have isn't necessarily from global warming, but from other chemtrail experiments. I realize that's going to upset some people, but you have to begin to question. In an effort to make things better, perhaps we're just making things worse. These chemtrails, it would seem that there's something here after all. I find myself saying that, and yet I'm shaking my head in the same time because I didn't give this conspiracy any real credence. I've always been one for enhancing technology, defining ways to improve our world through technology. And I think in some instances we have. However, there's a number of incidents documented in which technology has made things much worse for us. Certainly has created a number of other problems. And I think that perhaps what we're dealing with in the chemtrail conspiracy all along was in an effort to improve our world, perhaps improve our world. It has had the opposite effect. Perhaps it was an unintended effect. And that really, whoever started these chemtrails, it was really intended to improve our world. However, the flip side of this is what many people in the chemtrail conspiracy actually believe, is that this is done with malicious intent. We want to take control. We want to thin out the weak. We want to cause damage to those who don't agree with us. And there's a number of stories of certainly where certainly using weather modification, as I had mentioned with HAARP, has been used against, believed to have been used against other nations who didn't necessarily agree or didn't necessarily fall in line with what we wanted. I know people have pointed out to a story that I have seen come up a number of times now over the last week or so of researching, has been a flooding in Pakistan in 2011 as a response to not conforming with some of our anti-terrorism policies. Certainly knowing that they were harboring Osama bin Laden. So the idea is that the United States then modified the weather using HAARP stations as well as chemtrails to bring heavy rains and flooding to Pakistan. It's a crazy story, to say the least. To hear it said out loud, it certainly sounds crazy. But that being said, if in fact we have that capability, then why wouldn't the government, the military, use nature, as I had mentioned in my HAARP episode, to exert its will on foreign governments that do not cooperate with the coalitions or the United States' designs? It's an interesting thought. I don't know where I stand in terms of whether or not this has been designed to control us. It would certainly seem to be the case. I think you could put forth that argument that perhaps yes. We look at all these mass fish poisonings, and there's a number of arguments that people could say, okay, well, it's pollution, it's groundwater pollution, it's all these other factors. And it certainly could be. It may not be just one sole explanation. The other possibility here is that perhaps this really was done with the intention of trying to improve this world, but yet has gone awry, has gone south. We know of a number of cases in which the governments of the world in various stages have attempted to do things to improve their well-being and has ultimately backfired on them. And I cannot help but get this nagging sense that that's a distinctly possible scenario here. That what we are looking at is a situation where we have this brilliant idea of how to prevent droughts, how to deflect some of the solar radiation, how to keep things from getting over, how to prevent global warming. And we can do all these things, and perhaps it will improve. Yeah, that's possible. Or, as I had stated before, this was all done with the intent of damaging us, thinning the herd, getting rid of the weak, targeting foreign nations that don't agree with us. And perhaps it's a little bit of both. I don't have the answers, and I certainly can't say that I know the intent of this. What I do know is that in time, I have went from someone who was a complete skeptic of chemtrails to someone who now believes that, yes, they're legitimate. The question in my mind still remains, are they attempting to improve things, or are they attempting to make things worse? Either way, I think what we're looking at here is a situation with, regardless of the intent, that perhaps we're getting a situation where things aren't really improving, right? When we're looking at these toxic aluminum levels in water, in snow, in the soil, that could potentially be very hazardous to humans and could kill. That these chemtrails are being used to modify weather. Of course, then we go deeper in. Well, perhaps it's not just something so simple as that. Perhaps this is about mind control. Perhaps this is about making us ill. I would hope that that's not the case, but I can't say definitively one way or another. And that perhaps is one of the scarier things, right? I don't know. What I do know is that I now believe, which is something I never did before. It's not very often that I produce a show, I create a show, and then I come away feeling, yeah, well, there's something here. There have been times that I've either gone in with the idea that I believe something has happened, either from a personal experience or just from a number of other experiences detailed to me. I've gone into something completely not believing it and coming away still not convinced. This is one of those scenarios where I jumped in and I now wonder, perhaps there is something here. Now, before I leave you today, I do want to touch on something that is a direct result from my research on chemtrails and geoengineering. It's more of a response. And I'm not going to provide names. I'm sure you could go out and if you decide to research this, you will find this as well. The fighting between different camps and different groups in the conspiracy realm and in the paranormal realm is almost epidemic. It is so frustrating from my perspective as someone who really wants to try to bring as much of this to the mainstream and try to, I guess, more or less create a more professional environment, but yet not exclude the masses. It's so difficult to see people attacking other people for a number of reasons. And I don't want to get into specifics because I don't want to dredge this argument between two individuals out into the open here. But nevertheless, these camps that war with each other, and I'm not going to pick sides, and I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong. But what I do know is that this fighting over turf, or whatever you want to call it, sets the community back years. Particularly, in my belief, in the conspiracy realm. And I realize some people say, well, why do you think the conspiracy realm is worse than with this infighting? Why is it worse? Well, I believe it is worse because you're already taking material in which most people laugh off conspiracy theories. People automatically assume that if you believe a conspiracy theory that you're nuts, that you're just crazy, or you're paranoid, a little bit of both, and that there's nothing to it whatsoever. Yet, history has shown there have been conspiracy theories that were true. So, when you have this kind of infighting in the conspiracy realm, it is a huge problem. It certainly just destroys any credibility in the field. Just take it and flush it down the toilet. Your credibility's gone. Gone. Regardless of whether you're right or you're wrong, but putting these arguments out there in the masses, you just discredit everything that you do. It is horrifying from my perspective, trying to get this information out to the people, trying to highlight the work of individuals. And when I can, I put the names out here by all means. But I have felt like, particularly in this, I don't even feel remotely comfortable with expressing any of the names of any of the individuals that I've come across their work. Because I don't know how valid it is. I really don't. I've done my best. I do my best to make sure I'm putting enough information out there. But when it comes to specifics, I stay away from it because I'm very concerned. Unless I see multiple people address it, I won't touch it. And it's because of this fighting. And yes, it does happen in just the pure paranormal community. Certainly, you have the idiots that decide that they're going to fake a Bigfoot and somehow think they're going to get it past the masses. Claim that they catch a Bigfoot, and all these stories that are just complete bogus, complete garbage. It is so frustrating. And yes, you do see it in the paranormal realm, as I said. You see it with certain camps arguing over, well, this phenomena is UFO or this phenomena is ghost. And what I really wished is that the conspiracy realm would come together. As I stated, this episode for me has been about division because I see it everywhere. I see the divisiveness. If we want to make the world better, we have to unite. If the paranormal community wants to gain credibility, if the conspiracy community wants to gain credibility, you have to work together. Everybody's worried about getting their name on something, making their name, making their legacy. If you do the right things and you work together, there is more than enough legacy and more than enough credit to go around for everybody. But you got to do things the right way. And by airing dirty laundry and having these huge fights out there on the internet, you just discredit everything. You discredit your work, their work's discredit. Everything is garbage. You ruin it for people who are trying to legitimately make strides in their area of research. It is so incredibly disheartening and frustrating for me to come across this. And I, from my perspective, what do I do with it? I can't do anything with it. It's worthless. And that's unfortunate, because I know that those individuals put in an incredible amount of work. You leave it for the community. And I will say this, in the paranormal communities and in the conspiracy communities, I believe there needs to be a governing body, much as there is in any other profession, that works to unite and discredit those who do produce garbage, who do try to fake things. Those are two of them. That's one of the most important things that is needed in these communities. And the UFO community and the ghosts and poltergeist community, I think everybody needs to quit being as segmented and being a little more open to the possibilities. Work together. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be so closed in your dogma that you're not willing and able to see that perhaps there is something more going on here. Perhaps this is all much greater than we could ever have possibly imagined. Well, that's my rant for today. That's what I have for you. I really hope that you enjoy the show. And I really hope that you take what I said to heart in anything that you do today. I really do. That's my hope for those of you who listen to the entire show. I have every intention and hope that I will be back with a new episode next week. Once again, thank you to everybody who continues to support the show. I love your feedback, and I'll continue to do the best I can do with putting out the most quality programming that I possibly can, and try to get as good information out there to the masses as I possibly can as well. Once again, thank you for all of your support, and have a great week.